The people are both the masters of both the Congress and the courts. Not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who would pervert it. Where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. And where the government fears the people, you have liberty. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning into The Real Story. My name is Daniel Hapney. Tonight's episode, I just, after this most recent swine flu pandemic crisis hype stuff, I started thinking about it. And I thought about how did they move the mass mind? How did they get you to consider things? What type of programming? How did they take emotions and tie them to images so that, you could think everything's a crisis? And I was thinking about my life. Being born in 1960, now it's almost 2010, and I thought of all the different crises, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some. But I wanted to go over them with you, and I wanted you to remember. You got that word? Remember. I want you to remember this. Problem, reaction, solution. Three things. Problem, reaction, solution. And why? Because what I found was, as we were repeatedly, hyped up on crisis this, crisis that, crisis this, it's always the same formula. We identify a crisis. When I say we, not you and I, we don't identify it as a crisis. We're told it's a crisis, and then we're made to react. Oh, you have to make some change. And then there's some solution, which usually involves more control, whether it's control of society, a control of industry, a larger government. It always happens that way. So I was going to go through time, step through time with you, and see if you remembered some of this. And for you older viewers, when I say older, as old as myself, if not older, you might remember that they've done this many times, this problem, reaction, solution, crisis, crisis, crisis. So, I started thinking about it. Growing up, what do I remember? I remember that, we had an energy crisis in the early 70s. And all of a sudden, oh my God, we're running out of oil. We were told there's only a couple more years of oil left. We have to do something. Heck, so the crisis was energy. It was an energy crisis. But it's interesting, as soon as the price went up, the crisis went away. Did all of you forget that it was a crisis? I found interesting stuff out that, in the 70s, think about it, we got off the gold standard with the Bank of International Settlements, and what happened? The prices of all commodities went up, fuel included, but you were taught to hate OPEC. When I say you were, the conditioning then was hate OPEC. Those darn Arabs are keeping us from getting oil. Yet I find out that the previous president and his father and all those buddies were all oil people. And they went out with the Shah, and they hung out with the Prince Abdullah, or, whoever the Saudi Sheikh Prince, chief was. And as soon as, once again, the prices rose, profits rose for them and stuff, the crisis went away. But that was the energy crisis of the 70s. You probably remember because inflation followed it, and they blamed everything on the cost of energy. They didn't tell you that we got off the gold standard, and so that the Bank of International Settlements, who settles up between countries, Nixon said, no, we're not giving you any more gold to settle things with, because de Gaulle and other French people were smart enough to say, I've got $35, can I have an ounce of gold? But anyway, you were told it was an energy crisis, yet it wasn't really a crisis. We weren't running out of energy. We haven't run out of energy in the form of hydrocarbons, because to the best of my knowledge, hydrogen and carbon is not leaving the planet, at least not the atmosphere that I know of. But it's interesting because, once again, that was a crisis. Well, the crisis has continued. And what I found was, as soon as one crisis would go by, another crisis would pop up. And it's almost like filling your mind that, oh my God, it's scary, scary, crisis, crisis, crisis. Think about this. Tell me if you remember. Do you remember the AIDS crisis? Oh my gosh, there's AIDS. You've got to, people have to put on gloves, let alone masks at first, dentists, doctors, everybody had to have gloves. First responders had to have gloves because AIDS, AIDS, AIDS. Well, later on we found out that AIDS isn't what we were told it was, and that Fort Detrick, our bioweapons labs were working on retroviruses that we as taxpayers funded back in the late 60s. And all of a sudden, AIDS shows up in the 80s. And the guys doing the research in the late 60s were the guys who discovered it in the 80s. Kind of interesting, but it was a crisis anyway. AIDS crisis, you got to remember AIDS, AIDS, AIDS. There was, before the AIDS, there was herpes and stuff. So there are all these crises, got to change. And what happened? You had problem. Then you had the reaction. And then they provided, we're here for the solution. We've got to track this. We've got to do that. We've got to watch you. You've got to sign in here. We've got to check in. We've got to have your medical records. And just a thought. Remember AIDS? Remember, remember the other one, because there was one before, the herpes crisis, right? And AIDS, it's like, oh, it's only happening to homosexuals. Well, yeah, it turned out that they were the ones that got that blood clotting agent and that, oh, come on, I'm trying to think, the vaccines, where all of a sudden, why is it just that group, got the AIDS? And then over in Africa, they got all sorts of AIDS. But we found out later that Baxter Pharmaceuticals had it in their Factor 8 blood product. Oh, shoot. And they hit all those hemophiliacs, got to pronounce that right, and also in Africa, right? So they put it in vaccines, and people in Africa get AIDS, and it's a crisis. Boy, funny how it was years later. Now they're serving time in France. But anyway, it was a crisis. So you also remember Ebola. Oh my God, crisis is going to be some, plague thing. How about avian flu? Do you remember that crisis? Crisis, crisis, crisis. We all got to wear masks, got to watch this, got to, da-da-da. Hype. They hyped it. And what did they do? Well, then we had to buy vaccine stuff. We had to buy Tamiflu, blah, blah, blah. Remember the anthrax things after 9/11? When it was found out it came from our laboratories, our defense laboratories, specifically Fort Detrick. It was the Ames strain. This thing was engineered by our own people. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, that got the whole 9/11 terrorism thing. We'll get onto that in a minute. How about, do you remember the immigration crisis? That's right, you woke up one day and they said, it's a crisis. There's 30 million people around here didn't check in before they came in, let alone they didn't get TB screening, they didn't get what? We now have leprosy in America again, but all this immigration crisis, there's like 30 million illegals, there's only 300 million Americans. Oh, we can't leave out, that's right, more medical stuff. How about the mad cow? That was, what, spongiform encephalitis or something? I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly. But that was a crisis. They had to burn and get rid of every cow in England. And then it came out later that it came from the English bioweapons labs. Like the time hoof and mouth ran out of them. But crisis, 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 crisis. We need controls. We need bigger government. We need world government for the health organization. We need the WHO, But it gets better, okay? So anyway, recently, when I say recently, let's go back to 1976 because this is like, remember, 1976, bicentennial year, swine flu outbreak. One person in the United States of America dies of the swine flu. But it's such a crisis, if you watch the previous show, they hyped vaccine, the government did public service announcement, get the vaccine, get your swine flu vaccine. Well, it turns out that more than 25 people died from the vaccine, not from the swine flu. Only one official reported case of death by the swine flu. Yet all of a sudden, these people had vaccines ready, they zapped a bunch of people, and guess what happened? They died. They had to stop doing it. But you probably forgot that. But remember the hype, swine flu, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Remember that. Because as we go through this list, this is history, and I'm only saying it because it's repeating itself, and you may have been conditioned to, you're so busy, right? Oh my gosh, what's the next thing to worry about? So anyway, how about remember there was an education crisis? Oh my God, in America, here we have, we have all these schools and higher learning and all this stuff, yet education was a crisis in America. It was such a crisis in Massachusetts that Mitt Romney, what did he do? He put through MCAS. Now our teachers, for the audience out there who are teachers, they teach to this test. So now we have centralized determination of what should be learned and what curriculum should be. Boy, problem, reaction, solution. Notice the solution is larger control now that instead of the local community deciding what our children should learn, let alone homeschool and stuff, now we have the state government. And let's not leave out No Child Left Behind. We have the federal government determining, well, you're not going to get money. You're not going to get the benefits. We're going to tax you, but we're not going to give you that money because you haven't met our No Child Left Behind standard things. Once again, problem, the education. Oh my gosh, Americans are getting stupider, dumber. We're getting dumbed down. What's the solution? First a problem, reaction. We got to do something. Solution, let the government take over education. Okay, let the government take over control instead of local control of education. Just so you wonder, problem, reaction, solution. Remember the word was crisis because it's always a crisis. So anyway, yeah, we also had autism. Oh my God, that's a crisis. When they find out that, that none of those kids in those communities down in Pennsylvania, the Amish, none of them have autism. None of them get vaccinated. Yet everywhere people get vaccinated, autism's on the way rise. But it's a crisis, so what do we do? Well, we've got to put our kids now on what? Ritalin and Prozac. We need the drug companies drugging our children at an earlier age. Do you see the problem, reaction, solution yet? Because it was a crisis. Okay. Do you remember the savings and loan scandal, crisis and all that good stuff? Oh my gosh, there was bad banking going on, right? People lost their retirements. Okay, the savings and loan scandal. You probably remember one of our, would-be president guys, okay, the last election, McCain, okay, he was involved with the Keating 5, the Keating 6, Yeah, because he tried to, get the guy off. When I say get him off, lower his things. Oh, he's a good guy, even though he's ripping people off. Ask the people in California, because the people in Orange County lost tons of money during that. But once again, problem, reaction, solution. And what was the problem? The problem was, they're defaulting. Why? Because of bad loans made, by bad banks, made bad decisions, gave bad loans. Have you heard that before? So anyway, that's the 80s going to the 90s, okay?